This is CBN NewsWatch.
Thanks for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Brody Carter. We've got a lot to get to today, including the inauguration of Donald Trump today to once again become president of the United States. But we begin in the Middle East, where many Israelis are rejoicing over the return of the first 3 hostages under the controversial ceasefire agreement. But Hamas fighters come back out of hiding, declaring they've won a big victory over Israel. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl has this story.
Joy and tears surrounded the 3 women, Emily Damari, Doron Steinbrecher, and Romy Gonen, as they returned to Israel and the embrace of family and friends. As the 3 arrived at the Sheba Medical Center outside Tel Aviv, the crowd went wild. Friends were beside themselves with joy.
Our hearts are bursting, exploding. She looks just like she did when she left, as special and beautiful as she is.
Inside, the medical professionals took over.
I'm happy to report that they are in stable condition that allows us and them to focus on what is the most important thing for now, is reuniting with their families.
The Israeli military's chief spokesman weighed in after the women's release.
We cannot imagine the horrors these 3 young women have endured in 50 months of Hamas captivity.
Until the last moment in Gaza, the 3 hostages were terrorized, with Hamas gunmen and thousands of Gazan civilians surrounding their convoy and screaming at them. Hamas gave them gift bags with certificates of release, a map of Gaza, and photos of their time in captivity. Then the women were handed over to the Red Cross, which transported them into the hands of Israeli forces. As soon as the ceasefire took place, scores of armed Hamas fighters appeared from their hiding places and quickly took control again in the streets of Gaza. They're declaring they've won a mighty victory over Israel. This image of a conquering Hamas terrorist with his foot on the back of kneeling Benjamin Netanyahu is making the rounds in Arab media. The head of Hamas's military wing put out a video calling for Palestinians in the so-called West Bank to escalate their attacks on Israel. Hagari says the IDF is ready to face any threat.
In this agreement, there are risks and there are challenges. We know how to come back and fight and stand up for all the goals of the war.
Shortly after Hamas freed the 3 women hostages, Israel began releasing 90 Palestinian prisoners. Dozens of them are terrorists who murdered Jews in well-known terror attacks, one of the most frightening aspects for Israelis. As the deal goes forward, Hamas is supposed to release 30 more prisoners in the coming weeks in exchange for hundreds more terrorists. Negotiations are supposed to continue until all hostages are released and a permanent ceasefire is in place. With the Trump administration taking over today, Senator Lindsey Graham insists Hamas' declaration of victory will be short-lived.
This war will never end with Hamas in charge of Gaza, politically or militarily. Their days are numbered.
Graham also suggests that the new administration give support to Israel in dealing with an even larger threat, an Iran that could soon be armed with nuclear bombs.
I am hoping there will be an effort by Israel to decimate the Iran nuclear program supported by the United States. And if we don't do that, it will be a historical mistake.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Well, CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell is with us now from Jerusalem. Chris, this deal making waves nationwide, and in Washington, Senator Lindsey Graham says Hamas's days are numbered, but Hamas is calling this deal a victory. So how strong or weak is Hamas now, and how can Israel make sure that Hamas does not come out as the winner?
Well, Brody, they're certainly declaring that they are the winner. How does Israel go back to declare? Go back to fighting and defeat them once for all? As we saw, the Palestinians are celebrating. Hamas is claiming a victory. And right now, the IDF offensive is stopped, and we hear, eventually, Brody, there's going to be 1,700 Palestinians released if this deal continues. 1,000 of those would be prisoners from the fighting in Gaza. Another would be 700 terrorists, many, as Julie said in her report, with blood on their hands. Really, this has been Hamas's strategy from the beginning, using the hostages as really trade bait, along with the international pressure to just stop the IDF. So right now, at least in some parts of Gaza, Hamas is taking control. They're also in control of the humanitarian aid And as we saw right now here in Israel, Brody, it's a reeling and conflicted time. It's an open wound on Israeli society, these hostages. It's one big family. Many are euphoric about the release of the three women, Doron, Romy, and Emily. Tears, celebrations, and yet so many are concerned that those released prisoners will kill again. And it's not just theoretical. It's been chronicled. For example, back in 2011, more than 1,000 Palestinians were released for one IDF soldier. And the Shin Bet Israel Security Agency say those terrorists killed over 190 Israelis.
Well, Chris, this deal is obviously very controversial. One party's already dropped out of Netanyahu's coalition. So are there any risk to his government at this point in time?
There's a big risk, actually, Brody, and perhaps the greatest risk, even more than surviving the Biden administration, when there was a lot of pressure put on by the White House and the State Department. Right now, Ben Gvir, he's the party that has resigned. He's left the coalition. He calls the deal a capitulation to terror. But on the other hand, he does support the government from the outside, meaning that when there's votes in the Knesset, he will vote with the government. But it really leaves Netanyahu with a very slim majority. Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar, his party, the New Hope, came in recently, and that keeps that slim majority. But looking forward, a man named Bezalel Smotrich, he's the finance minister. He's from the Religious Zionism Party. If he's pledged to pull out of the government if they don't go back to fighting Hamas at the end of phase one, then Netanyahu would lose his majority. So Netanyahu has a really delicate balancing act between the Trump administration satisfying those who want the hostages back and also staying in power.
We've been waiting for the release of these hostages for so long, and it's interesting that many conservatives here in the U.S. are calling this a bad deal. President-elect Trump is also getting some criticism over it, Chris. So why are some saying that he might regret pushing Israel to make this deal?
Well, he has to be careful not to put too much pressure that I would actually collapse the Netanyahu government. I'm sure he would rather deal with Netanyahu than any other political leaders on the left here. And right now, some wonder and hope and pray that the deal is there's more to it than is known publicly. For example, did Netanyahu agree, or the Trump administration agree, to the guarantee of flow of arms in Israel? Will the U.S. provide Israel the munitions needed to destroy Iran's nuclear facilities? And then some are warning of the spiritual consequences if the Trump administration undermines Israel's future and endangers its people. Will it backfire on his administration? And that's why, Brody, many are asking for prayer for the next 42 days for this phase one, to pray for Israel, America, President Trump, and Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Of course, and they'll continue to receive that prayer from our viewers here at CBN News. But despite this criticism, Chris, over the deal, are most people in the Israeli government and the Israeli public, are they looking forward to Trump returning to office?
Definitely. I mean, they see Trump as a breath of fresh air from the Biden administration and the White House and the State Department for the last 15 months, putting pressure on Israel, slow-walking munitions, and really, actually trying to undermine the Netanyahu government. Right now, they see President Trump as the most pro-Israel president in their history. What he did from 2016 to 2020, recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, moving the embassy here, all of these taken together, they want to see President Trump. That's why some people are a little flummoxed right now about why the pressure the Trump administration put on Netanyahu at this particular time. But overall, I think there's a great deal of anticipation of the new administration coming in to the White House today.
Of course, we've just got seconds for this final question. I do want to ask you about the expansion of the Abraham Accords, or anything else most important to keep in mind regarding tensions in the Middle East.
I think two goals of the Netanyahu government: defeating Iran's nuclear, or destroying Iran's nuclear program, and also expanding the Abraham Accords. I think that's very likely with Netanyahu and the new Trump administration.
Our CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell, thank you for your insights. We'll, of course, continue to pray for lasting peace to come from the ceasefire agreement. Well, here at home, President-elect Trump, the 45th president of the United States, will become the 47th president after a historic political comeback. Trump believes that he has a mandate to accomplish a long list of priorities. CBN's chief political analyst David Brody has this story.
Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
8 years ago today, Donald Trump took the oath of office and now becomes only the second president to win a non-consecutive term. Now he's back with an aggressive agenda and a new strategy, according to Trump's first White House press secretary, Sean Spicer.
4 years out of office have really given him an opportunity to think through the agenda that he wants to get done. And the way I look at it is there's three components to that. There's the people, the process, and the policy.
In other words, Trump is surrounding himself with people he knows and trusts, rather than depending on the D.C. establishment. They are aware of the obstacles to overcome in getting his legislative agenda implemented. In the first 100 days, there are three main priorities: passing a border security bill that includes funds to finish the border wall and his mass deportation plan. Number two, repealing big portions of Joe Biden's signature climate bill to clear the way for his energy initiatives. And three, ensuring that the tax cuts he signed into law are extended.
As we saw with Trump's first tax cuts when it was passed in 2017, in 2018 and 2019, there was significant economic growth as a result. There was also more tax revenue coming in to the federal government. And so I think if Donald Trump is looking for ways that he can make sure that we're looking at 3% or 3.5% or even 4% growth in this country, yes, tax reform is an important way to do that.
When it comes to executive orders, there's talk that the 47th president could sign 100 or more on day one. The list includes a crackdown on illegal immigration, energy development, and regulations stating there are only two genders. And that's just the beginning of a likely whirlwind of activity that will continue for the next 4 years. Incoming Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt will be the main person tasked with communicating the agenda. Spicer shares tips from his experience at the podium.
I would say to her and everybody else, not that they need my advice, but Donald Trump has a very clear vision of what he wants done, how he wants it done, and how he wants it communicated. And so before you go rolling things out, make sure you check with him.
Well, David Brody also points out that President Donald Trump is also expected to pardon those involved on January 6th riot in 2021. Possible expansion into Greenland and the Panama Canal, that is, plus peace deals in Ukraine and the Middle East. Add to that, getting all of his cabinet members confirmed as soon as possible. There's a lot to come in the following days, so the incoming president, he intends to get a lot done very quickly. Well, coming up, thousands of people throughout the Los Angeles area have lost their homes and more because of those devastating wildfires. We'll show you how CBN's Operation Blessing is on the ground, helping people recover from this massive natural disaster. That's when we come back. Firefighters are gaining ground against the devastating wildfires in Los Angeles, but the impact is far from over. Thousands of homes have been destroyed and tens of thousands remain displaced due to evacuation orders. Paul Petit is on the ground in Los Angeles with how CBN's Operation Blessing is helping communities in chaos.
Just days after the fires broke out here, Operation Blessing arrived to find and meet the need.
There are so many people displaced during these fires. It's widespread, and people of all different backgrounds are facing this together, and they don't really know what's ahead of them. And so we want to make sure they at least have their day-to-day essentials.
That means gathering vital supplies to help the tens of thousands of fire victims.
We try to think outside the box at things that other people aren't being able to provide, and we try to meet them right where they're at.
Operation Blessing partnered with the LA Dream Center and Cathedral Church in fire-ravaged Altadena to deliver water, hygiene kits, and other essentials.
People's lives have been gone, their childhood, their memories, their livelihood. For most of us, like my job almost has been in the red zone. My boss lost her home.
At this Home Depot, teams put together disaster relief kits.
Things like gloves, cleaning supplies, N95 masks. So as people get back into their homes, or even if they're out of their homes, you know, this gives them a little hand.
500 survival relief kits were packed up today. To fire victims on the receiving end, these are vital tools to help in the cleanup effort. For Operation Blessing, these buckets represent a pathway to ministry.
We try to listen and try to give them prayer and just try to love on them and let them actually get their experience out as well.
After learning first responders were also in need, OB bought these sleeping bags for Station 66, which ran out of space to comfortably accommodate out-of-state firefighters.
We just heard of a new one with the National Guard. I guess we've heard that they're sleeping on the beach, helping fight these fires, helping, take care of the damage. And so we happen to have sleeping bags and tents that have been given to us from Operation Blessing.
Fearless LA, another partner, turned their sanctuary into a donation center to help fire victims.
It's widespread. It's impacting people of all different socioeconomic backgrounds. And it's really heartbreaking.
From churches to volunteers to businesses, it's a collaborative effort to meet needs and ultimately reach hearts.
It opens a different door, and you actually get to encompass them in a way and show them the love of Jesus by just putting your arms around them or praying for them.
In Los Angeles, Paul Petit, CBN News.
And as Paul reported, Operation Blessing is working with other ministries, providing important supplies like food, bottled water, and much more to everybody who's in need after these devastating fires. And if you would like to help, Operation Blessing's disaster relief efforts in Los Angeles could sure use it. Please head online to ob.org, where you can find out how you can donate. Well, still ahead, the war of words over the alleged cover-up of a scandal in Britain involving the sexual attacks on young children. We'll bring you that story right after this. Now for a look at the grooming gang scandal that has rocked Britain. Billionaire Elon Musk and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer have been embroiled in a war of words over Starmer's alleged role in covering up this abuse. Here's Dale Hurd with that investigation.
Musk says Prime Minister Starmer should resign for being, quote, complicit in the rape of Britain, for failing to sufficiently investigate the grooming gangs as prosecutor or to launch a full inquiry as Prime Minister. Starmer has accused Musk of lies and misinformation. CBN News was among the first news organizations in the United States to expose Britain's grooming gang scandal.
Here is our story from 2016, and we need to advise that this report contains disturbing content and should not be viewed by children.
Some scandals are so massive that they're simply hard to believe, but this one is true. As many as 1 million white English children may have been the victims of Muslim rape gangs, better known as grooming gangs, in towns up and down Great Britain. Policy analyst George Igler.
I mean, when you counter an issue that is just so unbelievable, just so outside your frame of reference and understanding, the immediate human reaction is just not want to believe it at all.
Perhaps even harder to believe is that while there have been prosecutions, British authorities have still not stopped this criminal activity.
There's a particular problem involving Pakistani heritage men who target young, vulnerable white English girls. Not my words, but a member of Parliament, Jack Straw, who also said these Pakistani heritage men view white English girls as, quote, easy meat.
This is when some shout racism, but here are the facts. Calculations based on convictions show that a British Muslim male is 170 times more likely to be part of a sex grooming gang than a non-Muslim. And there are no recorded instances of non-Muslims doing this to Muslim girls as part of a criminal enterprise. In one local jurisdiction, it was estimated that 6 out of 7 Muslim males either knew about or were part of a grooming gang.
What you do not have is any example of non-Muslim men targeting Muslim girls for this organized form of abuse. So the argument that this crime exists everywhere is not only false, but is being deliberately cultivated by the media and by the government inquiry that is kicking the can down the road.
The grooming gangs have been traced back as far as the late 1980s. At-risk white English girls, often from broken homes and some as young as 9 years old, were wooed or groomed by teenage Muslim boys called Romeos, and even by groups of Muslim men who hung around school gates. The plan was to make the girl feel important. She was given gifts and drugs, but she was being groomed to be a drug-addicted prostitute. Then came the gang rapes. The girls were threatened with death if they tried to flee. The definitive book on this scandal is Easy Meat by Peter McLaughlin, who declined an on-camera interview for safety reasons. He told us journalists would not speak about it because the perpetrators were mostly dark-skinned and Muslim. Childcare professionals used political correctness as an omerta, a code of silence concerning what the public was allowed to know.
These girls are the victims of a multicultural revolution, and it's certainly an indication of the fact that this accusation of racism is potentially the most powerful political weapon known to man.
The cover-up was eventually exposed, yet the grooming gangs continue to operate. One victim told a British newspaper, "Nothing has changed, not in the slightest. It's still the same scale as before."
Prime Minister Starmer claims that when he led the Crown Prosecution Service, it had the highest number of child sex abuse prosecutions on record. However, the grooming gangs were never effectively stopped, and the abuse continues to this day. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Excellently executed by Dale Hurd, but coming up we have a much happier story about those who'd adopted 2 dogs and then got a very joyful surprise. We've got that coming up after the break. Well, a call from California adopted 2 huskies almost 3 years apart, but then recently realized the 2 had much more in common than they thought. When Amanda and Daniel brought Zoe home, they decided to give her some space to adjust, keeping her separate from their other dog, Jazz. But once the 2 met, they immediately became inseparable. It seemed like they knew each other, and it turns out they kind of did. Amanda and Daniel did a DNA test on both dogs and found out they're sisters.
They're constantly playing or constantly sleeping next to each other.
Well, Daniel says it seemed like a perfect match, with Jazz bringing her sister out of her shell and making her comfortable in their brand new home, and now they're best friends. Well, that's it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. Remember, you can find out more about watching our news programs anytime on the CBN News channel or online with cbnnews.com. And you can tell us what you think about the stories that you've seen today by emailing newswatch@cbn.com. Talk to us on Facebook, Instagram, and X. And we hope that you'll join us next time. Have a great day.